hello, and welcome back, my galactic lovelies, to a very exciting episode of Mind the Force, a podcast where Star Wars meets mental health. I'm Kristine McPartlin,
I'm
and
James
I'm
Abbate.
joined by my lovely co-host James Abbate. And this is a very exciting episode of Mind the Force. I'm really excited because you've been here for our character retrospectives, and you've been here for our mental health condition assessments. This is our first concept episode where we aren't really examining a specific character, but we're asking a larger, overarching question. We're getting very existential here today at Mind the Force and answering a very particular question that was posed by the creative director of Lucasfilm himself, Mr. Dave Filoni, when he questioned why people are so damn into the dark side. And it's a very excellent question, and one that I hope we answer today on an episode we are affectionately calling Why the Dark Side. I'm really excited for this one. This one was it was so fun. We're going to dive into the philosophy and the psychology and really why humans do the bad things that we do. Are you excited, James? Are you tickled? Are you getting the spidey senses?
Always, I'm very into this. I think it's so cool to do something a little bit different and really put our tendrils out into the galaxy and explore larger motifs and themes, especially as the dark side encapsulates so many and makes Star Wars with the way that it creates the Empire. So I really am excited to dive in.
Yeah, no, this one, I mean, I think it just encapsulates everything that we try to do here with Mind the Force, in just making that bridge between the fiction and the storytelling and the mental health. And while that of course has the goal of like leading to healing and opening conversation, I think that you can't talk about healing without really understanding the human psyche and the human condition. And sometimes the human condition is like we do not nice things.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think a lot of it is also kind of understanding what it means to adopt the dark side on an individual level versus a systemic level or in group think. And that's what we'd like to get into with Dr. Muir today and just kind of see how it plays out in real life and in history.
Yes, this is going to be such an exciting conversation. I'm so happy to dive deeper kind of into this other side of things and really explore a larger question as opposed to just a singular character, as much as I love our singular characters. But as always, before we get into the big business, we got to take care of the little business. And so to stay up to date on everything Mind the Force, please check us out in all the places. There's the new mindtheforce.com. Go and check it out. It's shiny and new and very proud of it. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. And of course, to catch up on all your latest episodes, you can follow, subscribe, and share on all your favorite streaming platforms. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Amazon, Pandora, iHeartRadio. Like we're everywhere. It's wild. It's wild. We're on all places. We'll be up on Patreon very soon. We'll be dropping merch soon. We have our ongoing newsletter. Please head over to mindtheforce.com and subscribe to said newsletter. If you hit the link tree in the bio, you will find all the stuff in which to do all the things and all the places and clickables. It's a good time. You should go and do it right now. Shoot us a 5-star rating, because that helps the internet know how cool we are. We're pretty damn cool. I know you wanna contribute. Email us all of your big Star Wars thoughts and feels at mindtheforcepodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And as always, we are here for the smoke. Always here for the smoke.
And got to give the content spoiler warning as well. Mind the Force podcast is a retrospective on Star Wars characters across all Star Wars content. So all films, TV shows, novels, comic books, and video games are up for discussion. If you don't want some aspect of currently released Star Wars content to be spoiled, you know the drill. Turn around now.
You know, today is really exciting. I'm really excited to get into it with our guest today. It is, I mean, who I think is a very prominent guest. I feel very fortunate that he was able to take the time to speak with us. We have Dr. Owen Muir, and he is a dual board certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, and the co-author of Adolescent Suicide and Self-Injury: Mentalizing Theory and Treatment. He has held academic appointments at Hofstra Northwell, NYU, and Baylor, and he is the chief medical officer for IRX Reminder, which is a recent recipient of the SBRI grant from the NIMH for their work in AI identification of tardive dyskinesia. I'm really happy I was able to say dyskinesia. It's a big word. He's also the co-founder at Fermata. He is the senior VP for strategy at Acadia Clinics and advisor to Brainify.ai. He has over 200 academic presentations and publications to his credit, focusing on high-risk populations and the role of interventional psychiatry. And his main research is in neuromodulation for treatment-resistant mood disorders and obsessive-compulsive disorder. He has over 60,000 hours of clinical experience and is an official supervisor for the practice of mentalization-based treatment. Dr. Muir is a gifted educator who creates continuing medical education materials for the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and writes for the general public on topics at the intersection of healthcare and society for his popular Frontier Psychiatrist Substack. When not working to champion help that is actually helpful, he enjoys creating music and watching esoteric documentaries, especially with his twin children. Currently licensed in New York, California, Illinois, and South Carolina. Gosh, this is a busy man. Dr. Muir is a very busy man. And on top of it all, and I think most importantly, he is a big Star Wars nerd. And he is here to get into all of it with us today. And so without further ado, please welcome Dr. Owen Muir. Hello, Dr. Owen Muir. How are you today?
I am good.
We are very excited to have you on to delve into the psychology of the dark side and answer this age-old question, why the dark side?
So it's been a really interesting question for me as a clinician for a long time because I do some work with people who have both, the kind of standard psychiatric problems, depression, anxiety, etc. I also move through the world, so I see bad stuff happen. And I also work with individuals who have antisocial personality disorder, some of whom have psychopathy, some of whom have psychopathy but aren't particularly antisocial, etc. So it's both an interest personally, professionally, and as a kind of longtime observer of humans, something we have to wrangle with.
No, I can imagine that you've seen all sides of it because I mean I can see that coming from like obviously like an educational background and then moving more into like the real life application, that it's interesting to see things that like you probably read in textbooks play out in real life. And you're like, oh, these philosophical principles are true and they still ring true even from the time that they were like ancient Greek thought processes and turn of the century philosophers just like throwing things up in the air and seeing what stuck.
There is a difference between the capacity to do tremendous evil, the intent to do tremendous evil, the ability to do tremendous evil, and the ability to tell yourself a story that that's what you're doing and or not, right? And so I have a lot of conversations with people where I'm really curious, because that's kind of my jam is curiosity about, like, did you know at the time that it was wrong? And what I've learned is our ability to see it as wrong is really highly variable. Like it's my wife for years ran a group, a therapy group. We ran one together called the Misunderstood Genius Group, which was conceptualized, at least initially, as a group for individuals with narcissistic personality disorder, although it grew past that. And she ran a group for people with antisocial personality disorder and narcissism at once. And so it was people who had, in many cases, committed crimes. There's even a whole therapeutic manual for people who are violent criminals that's used in the UK. So it's a longstanding interest, and I honestly think those individuals deserve just as much care, and we get more out of it as a society if we take care of people who would otherwise do harm, if we can help them do less. I also like The Sopranos, and oh wait, what's that other movie? That's right, Star Wars.
Same page. I'm a big Sopranos fan, by the way. So.
Oh yeah, no, James is a huge Sopranos fan.
I was trying to get Kristine.
It's on my list. It's on my list. The list of great, truly great shows I need to watch. It's pretty long.
Yeah,
I haven't watched Sopranos. I didn't watch The Wire.
Oh my god.
I know.
I'm so sorry.
There's so much overlap too with the Star Wars. Star Wars is so black and white, at least in the beginning, and then it really delves deeper. Those other shows and series, they really kind of do encapsulate the same sort of idea that we're discussing here today. At least I'm rewatching Sopranos now with my girlfriend, and sometimes Tony Soprano, Darth Vader. I'm seeing a lot of those parallels, even throughout history, of course. But we can get into that later.
Well, I mean, that's the wonderful thing we examine here at Mind the Force is the glories of seeing ourselves in storytelling and what fiction and great storytelling can really reflect back on our own lives. And that's what we're here to examine. So see, the bada bing, bada boom, it works out. And being that you are a big Star Wars fan, Dr. Muir, I would love to know, I guess, what has been some of your preferred overlaps, I guess, between certain characters and what you've seen in kind of your everyday life. Have you ever been sitting in a session and been like, that's a very Palpatine thing to think?
I tend to Darth Vader's the interesting character for me.
Good choice.
Everyone else is a little bit less interesting, with one exception, which is Obi-Wan Kenobi, because he knows the whole time, and he makes the choice to not disclose what he knows, presumably for wisdom, but maybe because of guilt. And those two characters are the ones that really keep my attention to this day. So, we get to meet Darth Vader initially when he's behind a mask, for heaven's sakes. What a caricature of a bad man, right? But there's a person in there, and we're presented with his arc, and we're curious about who he is. And we get there. The other characters I like a lot are the robots.
I love a droid.
Well,
love a droid.
The droids struggle with their experience. The example I like to use is essentially the Obi-Wan Kenobi using the Force. It's a pretty shitty trick, because the good version of that would be 20 years later, that stormtrooper being like, what, those weren't the droids I was looking for. And in that moment, I realized that what I was doing with my life wasn't right. And I it had to change everything. And I'm so happy that he asked me that question, because it let me that would be, it's not just let the guy through. It's how do you change someone's perspective? And so there is a little bit of cheapness to these aren't the droids you're looking for. But are they? No, really? I'm like, what is it about these droids that makes you want to look for them so much? Right? That's right.
And do you have a cognitive dissonance the rest of your life for realizing I believe one thing, but here's the reality? How does that stormtrooper reconcile that, and how does that give him trauma throughout his life too? Just that basic reality. He has to say 2 + 2 is 5 in that instance.
He does, and,
in a sense, that's weird.
and again, the person who knows, right? We have Obi-Wan and we have Darth Vader, who knew the whole time, and it eventually is powerful enough as an anchor. Right? Love brings Darth back. And I'm a big Shakespeare fan also, as you can probably guess. And so the evil men do lives on after them. Right? So I think of Darth Vader as probably closest, at least in the beginning, to Richard III. Right? Kind of a fuck it character. Okay, out of arrogance and injury to his ego, he goes dark. But that's not the guiding force for him. The guiding force is love.
I agree, right? And this is why the dark side. We see why Obi-Wan chose the light side. Most people going into Star Wars aren't sociopaths to some degree, or having, falling on the outskirts in terms of that. But ultimately, like, I would say that, okay, well, degrees,
Like
yeah.
Yoda knew too, right? So if
Don't get me started on what Yoda knew.
right,
Like
there
Guilt
is
too.
these characters are not so different, right? The positions they find themselves in are different, and some of the choices they make are different. But what they know and when they know it, not so different. And so Obi-Wan got to see what Anakin was becoming. And did he stop it? No. There is a lack, like what Anakin has over Obi-Wan is a dedication to efficacy. He was willing to win and did in a way that was coherent with things he believed about himself. Do we think it's good? Well, I mean, the premise is no, but it's really hard to argue that Obi-Wan created a better world until much later.
Obi-Wan played the long game, and I guess it's kind of how we look at the dark side. It's immediate gain, for long-term pain, depending where that pain is inflicted. But I think with Obi-Wan, it was a lot of guilt. With Yoda, it was a lot of guilt. He had all the trappings of the Republic, of the Jedi Order stripped away. He was just living in a swamp at the end of his life. But he's like, I still believe, playing the long game here. Their ego, their pride, their evil will collapse, and there'll be an opportunity for the Force to find a way, and Jedi will return. They didn't know that for sure, though. They didn't know that.
They were living in
hung on
doubt,
hope.
right? But the actual hero at the end of that story is Darth Vader.
Yeah, he is the chosen one.
And he's
Killed the chosen.
and we similar to any good Greek tragedy, right? We don't get to know in advance what choices that are going to be placed in front of us. We just get to make them.
So I think that it's interesting that you said that really, like, the whole point of everything Anakin does, and really the point of Star Wars at the end of the day, is love. It's an interesting point of the dark side that I just found in my research that I found was really applicable to several characters, was that pretty much like what they're doing is out of love, quote unquote, but it's at any cost. So they're like, oh, I'm doing this like technical bad thing, but it's for the greater good. Like whether it's Anakin's love for Padme, or it's Palpatine's, I guess, desire to like escape his father, or it's whatever that character's big why, and they just put that above everything. And that's a very dark side thing. It's very anti-Jedi. It's very dark side of like, I'm going to make what we know as the viewer is a selfish decision, but it doesn't feel selfish to them.
Right. It's like killing 100 people to save your child. To you, it's a good thing. To the world, how much so? And especially, who are those 100 people you killed? When people tell me, like, to follow your heart, I say, oh, like Anakin. So it doesn't. Love can be selfish and love can be destructive. But I think when used in the right way, it could be liberating, and it's what life is about. I think the Jedi, as an order, had things messed up there, but ultimately, I'm arguing against the dark side. I think their way leads to what we saw in the movies.
The story people tell themselves in the process is really what ends up being a differentiator, because all of us have powerful forces at play, and often our hand is forced in any given moment. There aren't that many moments in our life where we get a real choice in which there's good and there's bad, and we know it, and we get to choose between them. But every once in a while, we can make a choice for others that's altruistic, or for ourselves in a way that's frankly dark and self-absorbed. And those moments are few and far between, and it matters how we make them. And so I think one of the ways of thinking about the dark side is there's a relentlessness to decisions that leads to yet more and more destruction. But it's not a series of bad decisions per se. It was probably one or two or three in crucial moments, and that those have a relentless logic. And once you convince yourself of one bad thing, the next thing becomes easier and easier and easier and eventually you're not making decisions at all. You're just sleepwalking through the destruction you create.
That's really interesting. I always bring it up with Kristine. She probably thinks I have a morbid obsession with it, but I read a lot of Soviet history, especially like the Great Terror. A lot of them post Stalin era, they're like, we were just going along with it. After a while, it's just the machine. What's another 10,000 quota? Dead people. In the Lubyanka shot that applies especially in Star Wars. What's another planet when it comes to we did the Moff Tarkin. What's Alderaan in the scheme of things? There'll be more. It's about our power here. It's about our future. And so what if you got to crack a few planets to make a galaxy?
And what's essentially to get to the dark side, to go from freedom fighter to member of the bad guy team, the ability to do bad, right? It's part one, and the ability to not take accountability personally. That's the magic. You know what Darth Vader never had to do? Be accountable for his decisions. So, like, if you're going to destroy Alderaan, and let's assume you've got a good reason, according to somebody, but part of that is being on the hook for it, right? And so the thing that Darth made him so Darthy is it was never his fault. Every time it was somebody else. And he was powerful enough to kill anybody who displeased him by calling out his nonsense. And so it's not just this will to do bad. Like, anyone can have that. There are people who are, criminals, and there are people who are law enforcement, and they can be equally psychopathic. We need people around who can embrace the dark side from time to time, because there are some things that need to be done in the world that are not savory or pleasant or nice, right? There are people whose job it is to kill somebody else. The military exists. Every once in a while, like, somebody needs to die or risk death, and there are physicians like myself who have to make choices every day, some of which are hard, and bad things will happen no matter what we do. And the difference, at least as I see it, between someone who's on the dark side and making choices not just that are nasty and bad, but without accountability. And so the real difference isn't good or bad, but it's making a choice and knowing you're going to hold yourself accountable for that choice, no matter how it turns out, for good or ill. And that's what I think Anakin lost. He lost the ability to be accountable, and that let him do utterly terrible things for a very long time until at last he couldn't anymore.
Right, it's the Empire that kills, not Vader. It's the name of something bigger.
Yeah. It's almost like reminds me a little bit of Nietzsche's Übermensch theory of just that finality of like, well, I'm just gonna pass the torch on to someone else. This isn't my fault. I'm just following orders. I'm just
agreeableness as a personality trait.
Exactly. It's easier to just follow suit, like, or even with Anakin or Vader, I think that he had it in his mind, I think after he lost Padme, that, oh, well, I'm just going to get powerful enough so that I can overthrow the Emperor. So everything I'm doing now, it doesn't matter because, I'm going to redeem myself when I overthrow the Emperor and bring real justice to the galaxy. And because of that, he just kind of justified everything he did, like all the murder.
And he wasn't wrong. The sting is that, like, for a lot of individuals, they don't, whether they're right or wrong in their experience is what ends up mattering to guide their next decision. And there are plenty of people who do things that are like, we look at from the outside and go, how could you? But like, in their experience, it's right at every step of the way.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's very kind of Nietzschean, the ultimate, like, foundational ideology of, like, people like Vader and Palpatine and the Sith. Ultimately, like, the framework that they believe in their mind becomes the reality for millions or billions, I guess, because they ultimately believe power is the only truth in the universe. They think that's it, and as long as you have power, you're okay. So once you're operating along those premises, you get something like the Empire. You get the choices that Vader made in chasing power, but while also absconding responsibility in that same sense, which is kind of interesting. So I would just argue the basic premise is wrong, and it just leads to destruction and chaos for everyone else and yourself. If that's your goal, great. But if it's not your goal, you're going to be sorely disappointed in the long run. Even if you die with all the riches and all the power, at the end of your life, your successors probably won't sustain what you had built.
There's a psychological theory. I will explain if it's helpful. So this comes from mentalization-based treatment, or MBT, out of the UK and the Anna Freud Center. Peter Fonagy is one of the creators of this. The other is a psychiatrist named Anthony Bateman. And Peter and Anthony together came up with this model and have promoted it around the world to people like me who are not so bright but can follow the thread. And one of the threads is that kind of what is in my mind is in your mind is a really early stage of human experience. So like if you're a baby and you need to not die, what's in your mind is true. That's why peekaboo is fun, right? Because for the baby, the person ceases to exist. For the adult, we know we're still there. But this mind-world isomorphism, what is in my mind is what is in your mind. That's what you're describing. The ability to collapse the mind of somebody else into what's in your mind. What I believe is what you believe is a state in which people can live. And the more afraid we are, and by the way, the bigger group we are, the more that ability collapses. And so the empire wouldn't work for one person. It had to have a bunch of people around it. There are hordes of people because only in a group of people is it so easy to turn off our empathy.
Groupthink, yeah.
It's incredibly powerful. The ability to punch someone in the face, that takes some work. Like if I asked you to punch someone in the face right now, you'd probably have a hard time with it. Because just on average, well, you'd think about, well, what's the other person going to think? Like, he's not going to be happy with me. He's probably going to be hurt. You got to do you got to lay groundwork for the punching in the face to be the thing that you do on average if you're living in a happy, healthy world. If you're living in a place that's dangerous, that may be a first line option. And so it's the perception of danger and how much we're together in a group of similarly minded people, how much trust is involved that lets us either transition smoothly and effortlessly to violence or have a real hard time doing that, which may be adaptive in some contexts but not in others. So that's the idea. They call it psychic equivalence. The other that goes along with that on kind of the too hot side of the equation before we get to the real banality of evil, which I'll call pretend mode, is teleological mode. So teleos from the Greek, right? Prove it. So I can't know what you believe until I see it proved. We see this over and over again. I can't know you're angry until I see you kill someone else. And when people see Vader kill someone in front of them, they have no doubt as to how he feels. He's proving it constantly. Vader can't just be angry. He has to prove it at every moment. And then people will have that fear in their mind and they'll comply with his wishes. But that's a failure.
Yeah.
Because he can't just say it and have people do it. He's got to drop yet another senior leader in the empire.
Drop a body, choke him out.
Gotta let him know. They gotta let him know at every turn.
Yeah, and that's limiting, right? It's profoundly limiting at the end of the day. The other part of this, which is just worth mentioning, is pretend mode, and it's the ability to turn off your feelings and just kind of go along to get along. So if you've ever had a conversation with customer service where it's like, well, it's our pleasure to help you. Is it really, though?
Mm-hmm. Tony Soprano, if the call's so friggin' important, why don't you answer the friggin' phone? Pick up the call. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think there's so much evil that happens in that space of being like, yep, yes, sir, what Vader said.
Yes.
Which nobody's saying what they're really thinking, and you're both agreeing implicitly to not tell the truth to each other in that moment.
You're lying, right? You're all agreeing to live a lie. You all know you're all terribly afraid, but you will all be part of that because the second you stand out, you're the one who's force choked,
we've learned it's dangerous to tell the truth to each other in some contexts, and ironically, the Empire was a tremendously dangerous place to tell the truth. Which
it's hard enough to say "I like you" to someone, individual level.
Yeah. These things are terrifying, right? And they built their own destruction by creating a world where everyone was afraid to speak up, and thus no one did. Like, somebody identified that Death Star problem, well before it. There was some dude whose contract, I used to bullseye womp rats back home, but do we have to bring this up? Probably not.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. Thank you. Appreciate it. This has been, it's a union job, so.
Right. Well, no one wanted to be the person to bring up the bad news, because who wants to go tell who wants to go tell Palpatine and Vader any bad news? Get the
They
fourth
created a
choke.
culture of a lack of accountability, right?
Yeah.
If
It's
somebody pointed
fast
out there's a problem,
in the movies alone, but even in the comics, they go the biggest, the most nervous anyone ever is who works in the Empire is like, who's going to tell Vader? Me? Oh, all right, it's a 50-50. I'll give it the odds. Here's the Vegas odds on me coming out of that room alive. And even like with Stalin, that whole incentive structure in the Soviet Union, they couldn't even agree on which doctors to get to save him in his last moments because they were afraid of getting the wrong doctor, especially after they just did a terror to out the doctors and kill all the good ones in the USSR. So that incentive structure, ironically, collapses the system, as with the Empire, because there is no trust and love and something to fight for, as with the rebellion. The Empire defeats itself in a way, I would argue. It creates a rebellion. It creates an antagonistic force to defeat it because it's not built on truth. And the hurt and pain and ego of Palpatine and Vader, it was not sustainable in the long run.
because the dark side alone, like there's always balance, right?
Yeah.
And the unbalanced version of this story is one where nobody can speak up and you can never correct a mistaken understanding. And that's why the Jedi mind trick is such a shitty trick. It doesn't allow for the conversation, which I wish it did.
Yeah, it is kind of like a big stop. It's just like, no, this is what you think. Okay, great. Like, there's no point. Like, you don't actually have to convince anyone of anything. You're just like telling them what to think.
I
Deus
imagine.
Machina, the gods descend. Yeah.
Well, I imagine Obi-Wan was kind of like disappointed every time he used it.
Well, there's that great robot chicken. No, actually, we just pretend. Or with the force chokes. No, it doesn't really work.
No, and
Let's pretend
he always seemed more satisfied when he got to charm his way through something. He always seemed a lot happier doing
a
that.
little smirk.
Right? That little Obi-Wan charm. Like, I think he liked laying that
Twinkle in
down
his
more
eye.
than he liked more tricking people.
It's more satisfying at the end of the day.
Right?
Well, it's interesting how philosophy and science actually intersect here because a lot of I feel that the ideas that science are now really investigating and detailing more further, I guess I should say, or further, were kind of like hinted at by early philosophers. For instance, like was it Democritus came up with the idea of the atom, I think it was him, but couldn't really enunciate exactly what it was composed of, you know. So seeing these ideas and seeing how, like in psychopathy, how more modern medical science and psychology has delved into that, you kind of see over time what philosophies held water and which didn't. One that's interesting even in more recent times, I think I want to discuss with you, the gaze of the other, Sartre, where it's like how that applies to dark side users, especially Anakin, you know. Your perception, your actions, living that out in reality based on how others see you being aware of that gaze. You know, I guess Anakin being born a slave and feeling insecure, the need to prove himself to cut people in half, you know. How do you think that, I guess, ties in? Like, is there a scientific description you give to the gaze of the other? You know, how do you reconcile that philosophy and with the dark side?
The best way I probably have to deal with it is understanding secondary psychopathy and trauma. Right. So early neglect in young people plus trauma equals badness. Essentially, the idea is we evolve with a system in our brain that prepares us to be born into whatever world. And there are some people who are going to be more adaptable to worlds that are more chaotic, and people who are going to be more adaptable to more collaborative settings. And we need some of both kind around because we don't know what kind of world we're going to live in. Like, if everything goes to, pot tomorrow and people are swinging swords at each other in the streets of Brooklyn, I'm probably dead. That having been said, like, I had 2 people try to mug me in the pandemic. And I used mentalization, which is my version of the Force, which is about curiosity. And so the first guy came up to me, and I had a base on my back. It was actually in Midtown Manhattan, like middle of the pandemic. And it became clear to me. This was like, yo, man, what you got there? It's like, it's an instrument. I'm like, you want to see it? He's like, well, yeah, I was going to take that from you. But your attitude was just so positive. We ended up having a 20-minute conversation. We exchanged photos.
That's excellent. When you get to the philosophy of it, like, why are you doing this? What motivates you?
So,
Hey, maybe
but that's what it was. Like, so the ability. So I had the choice in that moment. I could run away and maybe I could outrun the guy, or I could accept a different reality than the one my mind was presenting me with, which is that he meant me harm. And so I chose to imagine that he was just curious about what I had, and that bent reality in my favor. And it turns out he's also a musician. And he was also angry about how things are going in New York. And he was probably a little drunk, right? Um, and so we just had a whole we have kids like the same age. Uh, he didn't even need it. He was just stealing it because he could, maybe. Like, I'm a white guy in Midtown. It happened again right in front of my apartment and ended a little bit differently. But I had a kid pull a knife at me. He probably 17, 18 maybe. Pull knife like to my ribs. And I'm an emergency medicine trained doctor, so I at one point at least was dual appointed in the departments of both psychiatry and emergency medicine. So this kid pulls a knife at me, and I've learned how to de-escalate violence professionally. And so I, grab the hand, do the twist, blah blah, blah, pull him back, and the kid's like, "Give me your wallet," and I'm just like, "I'll give you all the money in the wallet, but the amount of time it's going to take me to replace my wallet is not what I'm doing right now." And he was just so shocked that like someone was like, he's like, "Yo, man," and so I'm like, "Back up." And I say it quite loudly, and he steps back, and now he's following directions, so I know what I'm dealing with. And so I just look at him and I say, "Do you know what I do for a living?" And he runs away. Now, it turns out I'm a child adolescent mental psychiatrist. I think about what's in your mind. But whatever he imagined was terrifying.
you picked the wrong person.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. Well, I mean, he ran away. And so it was just, my blood runs pretty cold at this point because people tried to kill me a bunch. I've worked in psychiatric emergency. Usually I have a whole team of like big nurses who are awesome and saved my life. And at this point I didn't. But you kind of have to handle yourself at any given moment as a psychiatrist. It's actually a very dangerous job in some settings because people are unpredictable and they have forces inside them that are rather distressing or dark, right? And you have to learn how to manage that. And so I chose to not kind of accept the reality I was being presented with. And so part of the power of the force, as I see it, is this ability to bend reality to what you need by understanding the minds of others. And what you do with it, you have to be accountable for.
Yes, totally.
And so that was me using the force. Like, this wasn't the mugging you're looking for.
You're so tall, like against a bear. Yeah.
Well, but at a certain point, like, I had to accept either I'm gonna get stabbed, right? That's one outcome of this, or it's gonna go my way. And once you accept that getting stabbed is part of that, then you can make good choices from there. And fear turns off that ability. So to answer your question, secondary psychopathy, early neglect plus trauma equals this downregulation of the ability to consider the minds of others and their suffering. It turns empathy down because it's not adaptive in the context in which you learn to feel. And so Anakin's early experience was like, that dude had PTSD, right? He had life-threatening things. He had avoidance. He had, the dysregulation in his affect. He had a persistently negative state of view of himself, the world, and others. And so he was primed. He was bait for someone willing to take advantage of that. And the trauma is what made him. And he had to heal. And he found someone in the Emperor who recognized it and did with it the wrong thing. But the core of the man wasn't the trauma. It was righteous. And had some personal accountability. And he was willing to sacrifice himself for something other than himself at the end, which, again, was his whole goal the whole time. He did succeed at the thing he started with. He was never wrong. Vader was never wrong. He was always going to be powerful enough to overthrow the emperor. And he did. The path he took to do that looks real gnarly.
It's a lot of force choking, a lot of body parts left in his wake.
And none of us want to be stuck in that, but like, it's hard to, if you had to like sit down for like a post-mortem with Darth Vader, like, so how'd that go for you?
Right. Well, we could ask the Force Ghost. Yeah, he's like, "Well, I'm here, aren't I?"
Well, and he showed up later, right?
Yeah. What younglings?
I always think that's interesting. Like, I mean, Vader as a character as a whole, like, we've spent a lot of time on this show examining Anakin, and we have a whole long series we'll do on Vader, which will be a
Vader's
whole
way
lie
more
in itself.
interesting to me
Well, but
anyway.
yeah, I mean, you can't look at Vader without looking at Anakin. You got to
Yeah.
start at the beginning.
He's the man within the.
But but what I always find interesting in Star Wars is the concept of the redemption arc, and I want to know your thoughts on this, particularly as somebody who has dealt with patients like these who do XYZ horrible thing. You do go back and examine and look at why, and you really like unpack their why. But then in the end, whether they come to understand this, whether they are rehabilitated or redeemed or whatever phrase you want to use, should we then look at them as like, well, now we can forgive this behavior? Like, does it excuse the behavior? Does it bypass it? Or is it like, well, it's good that you understand why, so you won't repeat this, so other people won't repeat the same mistakes, but you still are responsible for your behavior?
And my riff on this is essentially so much of our behavior isn't within our control. So much of it is a story we tell ourselves. The thought that we had free will in any given moment. I don't know how true that is. And I started, earlier I said the number of times in our lives when we get to make a choice, and it could go one way or it could go the other, is actually relatively low. Most of what we do is, not freely chosen. Most of what we do is habit. Most of what we do is determined by the moment. And most of what Darth Vader did, even when he's Darth Vader, or any of them were doing, was what made sense in that moment and the next moment and the next. There are very few moments of real choice. And what we tell ourselves is a different story. We tell ourselves something much more palatable, which is we made these choices all along. And that's really comforting. But I don't actually know that it's true. I think it's convenient and lets us get through our day. But I see people who have psychiatric illnesses, and I'll use an example of one, having a psychotic symptom. So having depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, and having a delusional belief. Or OCD, which actually can live pretty close to that. An obsession, a thought you can't help. It's entering your mind and you don't have any choice about it. Your volition around that thought's limited. Mm-hmm. And they have compulsions that are ritualistic behaviors around which their choice is profoundly limited. There are people with Tourette, right? We don't blame people with Tourette for having a vocal tic, and they can suppress them some of the time. Tourette tics are suppressible. Sydenham's chorea, your arm moving without your conscious choice, a tremor, mm-hmm. right? That's not voluntary. You didn't choose that. And there are behaviors that are much more complex that are just as involuntary. We tell ourselves a story. There's a condition called anosognosia. This happens after stroke. And I'll use it because it's probably the best example of this, of all the things I've said. Sorry it took so long. If only I had made a better choice to just go straight for anosognosia. The inability to know when is sick. So this happens in stroke. You can have a stroke that takes out your ability to move half your body. But the other thing it knocks out is your ability to know that it was knocked out. And so the doctor will come in and lift your hand up, which is paralyzed, and let go, and it'll fall on your chest. And you'll say, yeah, no, I want to do that. Are you paralyzed? Nope, I'm just resting. Really? Because when I pull your hand up and drop it in your face, you seem, he's like, yeah, but I wanted to do that. That's exactly what I was just into right now, and now it's sitting on my head, not because it's paralyzed, but because I choose it. And so their brain is still telling stories about why in a way that's palatable. And yet their ability to choose has been completely removed. The motor control of that part of their body is dead. But the storytelling lives on. And that's what I see happening in a lot of these individuals who are doing things that one step after another are bad. And they tell themselves the story that it's okay because it's the only way to get through the day. But a lot of their choices have been circumscribed. And I think that's true for many of us throughout our lives. So many of our choices are just what was going to happen, whether we were under anesthesia and unconscious or not. Right? You can literally sleepwalk through your life much more than you can actually make a moral choice and be held accountable for it. So the real challenge is, how do you hold yourself accountable for things you didn't have a choice about?
What's interesting? The first example I ever heard of it wasn't a physical condition, but it was a mental condition in relation to schizophrenia. Is actually, I read about the young actor who played Anakin Skywalker in Phantom Menace.
Jake Lloyd.
Yes, he has schizophrenia, but he also has the condition that makes him unable to understand that he has schizophrenia. And so that's why it immediately made me think of that. I was like, oh, he's suffering from that as well. And I didn't, and it's interesting that it can also apply to like the physical as well as the mental.
Yeah. And so the ability to have insight is not the same as the ability, like that's a waxing and waning feature that can be just a symptom of a problem.
Interesting.
Which is different from the underlying problem itself. So you can be both delusional and know you're delusional, but still believe it.
Right. I've seen that, and I think we're all guilty of that to some degree. Like, oh, I'll finish this paper by tomorrow, and in your head, there's no way you're staying up till 4 a.m.
Right, the lies we tell ourselves.
Right, like, I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow you're going to go binge that tequila bottle, for instance. But it's actually interesting because I do have OCD, so I hear what you're saying. I'm like, oh, I need to count right now. I need to count everything in my life, and that urge is so strong. I actually do have, it is relevant to this whole podcast. I actually do see a behavioral therapist to limit that without medication. I know that's kind of the cure-all in some cases, but I'm trying to do this from a step outside, fly on the wall approach and dissect my every kind of thought and reality, action and consequence. And I can put it off to some degree, so I'm increasing my window of choice. But the window, it will never be as open, for instance, as your guys in that specific case. You won't feel the need to count as much as I will. So my option is limited there. Someone like Darth Vader, you're right. In many cases, if he had tried to step up against a Palpatine, he would have sent, the Emperor would have sent a wave of electricity at him. He wouldn't have gotten near. But in that moment, in Return of the Jedi, he said, I have this opportunity now. Take it. That was when his free will kicked in. But I think you're right in the sense that if it would have come sooner, it would have, but that was the only opportunity that he had, that ability to make that moral choice. He could have made that moral choice before, but it could have went belly up.
Essentially, there's a condition in OCD specifically actually called moral scrupulosity, where I think of it as synesthesia. That's the crossing of sensory modalities, like you hear a color or you see a sound, right? That's synesthesia. There's synesthesia for distress as well. And so in OCD, it can apply to morality just like it can apply to symmetry or the right number or count. And so if someone does a wrong thing, it can hurt you more than it hurts somebody else. And so this inability to tolerate things that are not moral. My favorite criminal example of this, I think, was Pablo Escobar, who had amoral scrupulosity, as I understand it. Like, he couldn't tolerate people disobeying him. And so silver or lead, obey or I shoot you. And he hoarded animals. He had to comb his hair for 45 minutes. Classic OCD stuff. And also couldn't tolerate, to a degree that was rather destructive for him, even as a criminal, a gangster in his culture. He couldn't do what the Cali cartel could do, right? They could just get on with business as usual, and he couldn't tolerate it. And I wonder how much of the empire was that scrupulosity around power. Not just the will to power that they clearly had, but could the emperor literally not tolerate anyone disobeying him and happen to find himself in a position where he could enforce that relentlessly because he was compelled to do so? Maybe it was a compulsion and not a choice for him as well.
In the comics, I feel like they definitely expand on Palpatine and give him a lot more free will. They generally say, sometimes he's like, let it go with these people. They'll be useful down the road. Or, no, let them have this seeming victory over me. In the end, I'm still the emperor, sort of let this planet just live happily. I don't care what they feel, whether they're happy or not. I'm still the big cheese, and that is interesting. But in the galaxy, he's at the top of the pyramid, so he obviously has the most choice, at least in theory. But reality kind of always wins. And I think the choice to make the conscious choice for the rebellion to happen, that consciousness defeated his, if that makes sense.
There are rebellious individuals and there are agreeable individuals, right? And there's something profoundly disagreeable about being in the rebellion for anything. And we spend a lot of time essentially, pooping on people who are too disagreeable. And I think they're gems in our world, and without them, we would be really stuck, because agreeable people, at the end of the day, like, those are your stormtroopers.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I grew up loving the prequels and I got hated for it my life, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Somebody's got to do the agreeable stuff, but there's, again, a balance. You need some people around who'll say yes, and some people will say, but wait, for reasons that make sense to them and may not make sense to everybody.
Right. I mean, you have it. I mean, and that really applies across the board. Like, you have, of course, in the halls of power, like, you have, yeah, you need advisors who will be able to tell you no. If you're just surrounded by yes men, that's an issue. All the way down to our personal lives. Like, if you have friends that just agree with everything you do, they're just gonna sit around and watch you be messy. Like, you need a friend to tell you no.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to be like,
Right.
no, that's not a great idea.
Yeah.
Like, you need those questioning voices. And I feel like that's what a lot of people who I think follow the dark side ideology lose, because they just block themselves off from anything other than, I guess, what they feel their goals are, and that they have the power to go and take it. And they're like, I don't want any negative voices. I don't want someone to tell me no, because I have the power to make that a yes.
The dark side only works because you can't see anything else.
Right, you preemptively shut off your free will. You're like, it's the what is it, Platonic, like Plato, the shadows in the cave. You'll never see the fire because you refuse to go outside, or see the light, I should say. You're just going to stay in that cave and only see the shadows. You're not going to see the real world, and that's what the empire is. It's like refusal to even increase your worldview or increase your choices. I'm just going to stay automaton on this treadmill. That's it. I'm staying on it.
And just for a moment, imagine, like, working your way up in the empire. You're not going to be a main character. You're not going to, you're not going to have that energy, as it were. But, there are a bunch of people like, well, I got a honey, great news. I got a job. You're not going to believe this, on the Death Star. I am on level 3 in accounting.
Well, I love that. I mean, I love that Star Wars now, like, they're doing a really good job of telling those smaller stories, because those are so interesting. Like, yeah, Anakin and the Emperor, like, all these, like, big tier people, great, but I think Andor did a great job of, like, showing regular people. Skeleton Crew right now is doing a really nice job of just showing kind of, like, regular people in these smaller lives.
And there's moments of heroism for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah.
Everyone. Somebody had to make the choice at every moment to make it, to do what was possible for the best thing. And it's the wisdom ends up being around, like, how big of a swing do you take or not in your life? What's that moment? You know what? I got an offer at the Death Star, and it's not right for me. I saw what they did with Alderaan. I saw what happened with Death Star 1. I'm actually going to pass on Death Star 2.
Right.
Right?
It's
And
just,
they would have been right. They would have been right.
It was
we
right.
raised you to be a great accountant. You got a job at the
Right.
Death Star, and you got to say no to it. What son of Oz are you?
But that's a fool me once, fool me twice. Honestly, whoever worked on the Death Star 2, if they knew about the first one, which by that point I'm sure they did, everyone heard about the Battle of Yavin, they were either stupid or really evil, because it's like, okay, now you know what the risks are attendant. Okay, they got rid of that one little weakness. They did it once, though. They can do it again, and now you're really putting yourself on the line to commit totally to power. That's really doubling down.
Maybe, and maybe they're making a rational choice. Like, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to choose which web platform to use for our telehealth visits, and there was a security breach of Zoom really early on. And my
Mm.
IT director said, "Great, we're going with Zoom, because they got embarrassed now, and they're going to be on it ever onward."
Mhm.
And so there is just, like, fool me once, like, the Death Star, I imagine, was a massive investment.
Oh yeah.
uh,
That's true too.
Very over budget,
Over
very
budget,
behind
right?
schedule.
Microsoft Authenticator. That's
Yeah,
it. No one's
exactly.
getting my way
Right.
out of it.
He's got 2FA on that one.
Well, that's
How
you're
many?
right, actually.
So,
There,
yeah,
there
it'll
is
be
that.
safe, right?
Well,
Um,
it's like yeah, with cyber hacking, it's like okay, now, or even Snape and Dumbledore, it's like I trust you totally, Snape, because yeah, you were Death Eater, but now I know your loyalty is really with me. That was even in that, yeah.
I never read Harry Potter.
Okay, sorry, spoil it.
It's
Okay,
okay. You spoil. I just don't like the woman. I don't like the stories, and I feel
fair,
vindicated at this point. Um,
fair enough. That didn't spoil
just
it.
like, talk about someone who should know better. Please don't kill me. Yeah, come and get me. Come on. All of us have those moments where we can choose, right? And you get to choose little, you get to choose big, but are we bending towards justice or not with the power we have available to us? That's the question it asks us all to think about, and
Yeah.
like to make anything big and like to make something awful happen, you need people working together. The same may be true for for any of us, like for good as well. Like any individual choice we make to gum up the works, that's valor meritorious, maybe. If you're like a mid-level employee in the empire, like your only real ethical choice is to gum it up, right? Because if you get kicked out, like, well, someone else is going to do the bad thing. You have that choice to make. Um, and none of these are easy choices. If you get them, but the more you kind of attend to the moment, the more everything that was sleepwalking can become a step you choose. That's my pitch, at least today.
You're right, though. The Empire definitely, and the dark side in general, I think it reduces wills because it took billions of wills and made a conglomerate of one will, So it's just reducing the possibility of disagreement or disagreeableness. And that was kind of, I guess, the genius of it. But it was a Faustian bargain. It was very short term gain for long term pain in the sense that the Empire does not exist beyond 23 years. Yeah, there's the First Order, but that's a whole different subject. But like the Sith have existed for millennia, but and yet those Sith or dark side, wannabes, they do gravitate still towards the dark side. This is a whole episode of why the dark side. They still make the choice, knowing what's happened throughout all of history, thinking there'll be exceptions, or knowing I'm here for a good time, not a long time.
And there's a contrast here. So I talked about trauma, it's like secondary psychopathy before, antisocial activities, right? Things that are violating the rights of others because you've had an early experience of trauma and you can turn off your empathy. There is a small portion of people who don't have any, and we call that psychopathy, and that's different. It's not necessarily evil, but it's the kind of thing the Sith have been around for a long time, and essentially it only works in a parasitic relationship with the good. If you put it in control, everything goes to hell. There's a genetic predisposition to psychopathy, to not feeling empathy for others. But those individuals thrive in a small percentage of the population because they can prey off the credulousness of others. If everyone's a huckster and everyone's a scammer, then no one gets scammed because everyone's on the lookout. You need scammable people for scamming to work. And ideally, it's very few scammers to a lot of marks, right? And so the whole Sith thing is only good if you have the counterbalance of people you can scam. And once they decide to take the big swing, they destroyed it. Because, I mean, why are there only two?
Right. Well, that was the rule of two. Was in Darth Bane, right? He's like, there's too many.
Bella.
We're destroying each other. We're eating each other at this point. We got to eat the good, right?
But there was another reason why few make sense, and that's because at the end of the day, you saw what happened. It's not a large scale. It's a reliable strategy as part of the whole. It's not it doesn't work as the whole thing. It just doesn't. It's not a stable equilibrium.
Well, and also I think for the sake of the story and what we're supposed to take from the story, I also think that's the point. Like that we're not supposed to see despite all of the self-prescribed like dark side supporters, myself included, I'm not gonna deny it. That is the point of the story. We're supposed to see the dark side and the ideologies as unsustainable. Like there's a reason why the empire doesn't work. There's a reason why like communism doesn't work and why like the fall of the Soviet Union happened. Like we're supposed to like those are the lessons we're supposed to take from it.
It is a morality play.
Yeah.
Trying to teach us a lesson. And yet we see it happen all the time.
Yeah.
it's a process.
Human,
It's
yeah.
cyclical, really.
The concept that from science at least, or at least biology, is the predator-prey arms races, and there are some equilibrii that are stable over time, but in no moment are they individually stable. And so you'll have too many predators that eat all the prey, the population collapses, the prey explode, there are more prey for the predators, etc. Those things exist, and so we've had over time this ability to synchronize with each other, um, evolve from very humble beginnings. I like to explain, like, you look at a school of fish. They didn't exchange notes. Okay, at second 17, we all go left. Right? What they're doing is they're building models of each other in their minds, in their little fishy minds. There was a gene duplication event about 300 million years ago in the Cambrian explosion, right around the same time as we had jawed, bony fishes, who are the ancestors for all of us, by the way. And that was a gene duplication event in the serotonin, and a serotonin transporter, called 5-HT2A in that system. And I understand it to have worked as essentially a gain control in our ability to gate our sensory experience, and that allowed us to create this remarkably synchronization both within ourselves and between these different organisms. So a school of fish is acting as one because they have this extra ability to sync up in a way that's honestly remarkable. And the way it works is, like, they build models of the other fish in their minds, and they're imagining where the fish is going to turn, and they can error correct by a little bit at every turn to make sure they're swimming with the other fish, which, by the way, is what humans do on the dance floor and what the stormtroopers were doing in the Empire.
Ooh,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Which is why
so
cloning
intense.
mattered, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
No,
I never looked at it
Effortless
from that perspective.
synchronization.
I can see that. Like, just like the perfect army of, like, you turn left, I turn left. Just like you need just easy repetition, something programmable. Like, obviously, what, because that was Palpatine and Plagueis, like, playing the long game of, like, and we can, slot this little chip in there that we can use when the time is right. And we can make them turn left and turn right.
Yeah.
Oh, that is interesting. We're all just fish.
Well, you mentioned an
Well,
interesting.
I think that's,
yeah, actually.
we're all just fish.
Like,
Well,
literally.
that from a biologically evolutionary perspective too. When you think about, like, it's really interesting. You said the predator-prey relationship. I don't think the predators and preys of today give a flying fish about the fish of like a million years ago. They don't think about those predators and preys. Like, I'm a predator. I need to get my meal tonight so I can live till tomorrow to do the same thing and be a predator on these. I don't care about the sustainability. I don't care about what's out there. I need to fill my stomach. And they always think, yeah, maybe if I eat all the fish in this pond, there won't be any left, next year. Maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe some fish will fall. And that's kind of the psychopaths, from what I've seen, their perspective. It's like, I'll just keep living because I'm the movie camera. And it's like Sopranos too. The movie keeps going on. He's like, you know, anything to roll the dice one more time. It's that very that gambler's necessity to keep going and going, even though they know they may be hurting themselves, very likely hurting others. But it's just the not thinking of the future. I guess it's just blinders, living in the moment, and that's when that can go wrong. And that's what I think motivates a lot of people in the empire. They're like, it'll work out somehow.
And so
I'm
my
me.
challenge to you is the time scale over which you think about a thing matters. Because you're right. In the moment, the predator doesn't think about the fish he's eating. He's just going to eat the fish, even if it he eats too many fish and there are no more fish and he's dead. Right? That's the dark side, is that predation, that exists in balance with the fact that over a long enough time scale, that's never stable. And they're really only playing out their pre-written part in the play. So, like, at which moment does the fish get to go, you know what, I'm going right?
Right, right. Or in history too, like with,
Yeah.
with someone like Pol Pot, how do you kill so much of the population, expect to still have a population serving you? At some point you're ripping away not just people but infrastructure, economy. Like, you're just tearing away at yourself. How do you think that's sustainable? There's something obviously psychopathic about creating that as an incentive structure.
So, but it's one or the other. It's not necessarily psychopathic, but it's definitely bad.
Okay,
So
right. You could
it
still be a
helps.
normal person working in it, right? Whoever
There,
creates it is this like
the reality is that the vast majority of people doing terrible things are not psychopaths, and most psychopaths don't do terrible things. We need some of those people around. If you're a pediatric palliative care doc, you know what we don't want? You to go home every night and cry yourself to sleep every single night of your life because another child died. You can't be a delicate flower and help children die painlessly. And yet, if your kid is dying, you really want someone who can ease their suffering and who, frankly, isn't going to get ripped apart about it. We need
They,
tough people sometimes who can do a difficult thing that doesn't rip them up. And at the same time, you can't have it be everybody. So most psychopaths aren't awful, and most awful people aren't psychopaths.
I was reading something actually. I think it was called psychopathic competence. I don't know the exact terminology, but along those lines, where it's like exactly what you just said. You need people who, for instance, dissect people. For me, like even brain surgery, as helpful as that is, as a result, to me, just picking at a brain, like I cannot do that. And I'm not saying they're psychopaths, but by some measures, there's different degrees of like, okay, I can numb myself to just chopping people up or working in a crematorium, for instance. There's obviously levels, like I said, but they say without that competent, useful societal psychopathy, air quotes, society wouldn't function. You need, those people in those fields. They're fulfilling that specific niche to do the job competently. Mhm.
And part of it is creating a world where we have roles for everybody. And so there's some people who are going to be delicate and they need to be in roles that nurture their success. And there's some people who are rougher and tougher and we need to give them a place to be also. And, had there been, a pro-social way for Anakin to, do his thing, and maybe there was, and he missed the spot like several times over, right? Maybe a bad example. But we need those folks are there, right? There are people who are more tuned out to empathy. Maybe they're not psychopathic, but they don't feel things as deeply. And there are people who feel tremendously deeply. And it's about having useful roles for everybody. Like there, if it wasn't for psychosis, we wouldn't have had the Oracle of Delphi, who is probably also high from the fumes.
Yeah.
And how would we know what the omens portended for us?
Hmm. Yeah. No one would have gotten into that to begin with. Hmm.
Yeah, like who's like, you know what? I'm gonna go XYZ. So there is, my wife likes to say, there's an ass for every seat, but we do have to honor that a little bit. Like find what you're good at and find a way to ennoble it. With really difficult oppositional kids, I'm like, you're gonna be a great advocate. I can't wait for you to be a lawyer for the ACLU because you're going to rip it up. I actually just had one of my patients from when I was a child psychiatrist at Bellevue who's now going to law school, and I'm so happy. He's going to be amazing.
Oh, that's great. You got to track that. Okay.
Yeah. And there, you need some people like I neurosurgeons have to be, someone. If you do neurosurgery, great, people are going to die because you screwed up or didn't do it perfectly. Now, on average, will you save more people than you kill? Yeah, I hope so. And they go through a lot of training to get there. But just like imagine the person who's, you know what I'm going to do with all of my time? Prepare to save a tiny number of lives, and sometimes I'm going to kill them because I fucked it up. The person who invented the hip replacement was one of my teachers. And my classmate asked him in an anatomy lab, which he was still teaching well after he stopped practicing, how many hammer blows does it take to replace a hip with this hip replacement joint? He's like, one hammer strike less than it takes to shatter the femur. How do you learn that? Shatter a couple of femurs.
That's how they count it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That was his actual answer in
That's
anatomy lab. And so we do need some of those people around who can shoulder that burden.
Yeah.
Even
thanks,
in
Darth.
Right.
even in government
Like,
too, like leaders all
Yeah.
around the world, at some point you're gonna be dealt the nuclear codes if you have that, or defend your country. It's like, okay, so someone at that point is going to have to accept to do the hard thing. Again, I don't know if it's anyone in this Zoom or this Riverside room. I cannot do that. I do not have that level of. I would just honestly probably make the world worse by making the weaker decision. I would say I just don't want to make that decision for myself, and I'll let the world go to shit over that. And it's not that it's because I want the world to do that. It's just I don't have that ability to do what needs to be done in that situation.
right, you don't always get to know what you're made of until you're like in the situation. Um, I recently performed the Heimlich for the first time.
Really?
Uh, yeah, someone was choking, and someone goes, "Oh my God, they're choking," and I just reacted, and I was on the other side of the room, and I just flew across the room and just started performing what I kind of remembered was the Heimlich. I don't know if I did it right, but it came up, and somehow I did it, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, where did you learn that?" I'm like, "I think I took a safe sitter class when I was 10. I don't know. I just reacted, and it was like I thought about it afterwards. I'm like, I guess good to know I know what to do in an emergency. I Because sometimes you don't know till you're kind of put in that position, and you're like, act or don't act. And so I guess that can go for either way, whether it's a good thing or an objectively bad thing.
There's a
Mhm.
moral Heimlich maneuver that we may all be called upon to make.
And those are the most tense and interesting. Not well. Sometimes it can be gimmicky, but when done right in like movies or books, for instance, like when in House of the Dragon, you know, it's like which child are you going to save, or even in Spider-Man, it's like Mary Jane or this busload of children. Who Spider-Man
Yeah.
can do both, of course, but that was the Green Goblin's fault. But what will we make in that decision? Our love, like I said, or these strangers we've never met, but they're the future, they're young, they're innocent, and can we go to bed at night knowing I saved my love, but F those kids?
And I feel like that's such a common thing in storytelling where you have like the it's really the selfish versus selfless. It's like, do I give up the thing that I love most for the greater good, or for this bus full of children, or for the world? Some people are like, I would burn down a world for the person that I love. Like, one person versus like billions of people. And I guess in the context of how we're presented with a story, maybe that'll kind of like depend who we root for. I think that becomes particularly nuanced in like anti-hero stories, which I think we see now more and more. I think back in the days in like the 70s when Star Wars first came out, we were just getting good versus evil, dark versus light, black versus white, um, very like white hat, black hat. And now I think we really enjoy an anti-hero story. Like, it adds all this color to what used to just be like very dark characters, the villain. Like, the villain's a one-dimensional character. We don't need to know more about him. And now we want that. Like, we want the anti-hero story. And they're doing bad things, like objectively bad things in these stories, but we're still rooting for them. Like, we still want Walter White to make all that meth. We still want Frank Underwood to like take over the government or whatever he was trying to do. And I find that such an interesting part of, I guess, our own humanity is like, I'm really sitting here rooting for this villain. Like, I watched Penguin and I'm like, oh, I want Penguin to win, but I'm like, he's also selling a lot of drugs. And
Because he's interesting, right? You're the one that's spending the time with all that person, you know?
yeah, and it's so interesting, just that nuance of that perspective. And as a viewer and someone absorbing the story, I find that very interesting. Like, where it then takes me, it's like still an emotional journey, but it's from such a different angle. And I'm like, is that good? Is it?
Right.
So this is where, as a therapist, you know, I'm a psychiatrist, but some of the healing I do is by psychotherapy. A lot of it's by brain stimulation directly, by the way. So I do like brain scan guided neuromodulation, and I also talk to people, which is neuromodulation in itself.
Mm.
And some of the people I care for therapeutically have done terrible things or will consider it or the like, and it's not my job to judge. It's my job to heal. And so the way I explain it is I stand on the side of those who've been shot with the bullets, regardless of why. And I actually had this tested the other week. I got a phone call to see someone who I have very publicly decried. And I said yes, I would. And I didn't end up seeing them, so I can say that out loud. And I'm not telling you who it is or what the context was, but like in that moment, I had to choose: am I going to help someone get healing who I think does terrible things with their time? And my answer as a physician, in keeping with my oath to heal, was I'm willing to do that because A, it's the right thing to do. I'm a healer. I heal. That's my jam. And also, in keeping with everything I've said to every patient, like, I'm not here for you because you did something good. I'm not here to help you because you're a good person. I'm here because you are inherently worth it. And that's the other part that, like, the dark side misses, is the inherent value of somebody else just for being a person. They
Absolutely.
completely dispense with. So it's willingness to do bad lack of accountability and dispensing with the inherent humanity of everybody else that makes it possible to do relentless awful. And you only get to know in moments when you're asked, like, to do a surprising thing for good or ill. Like, would I see a murderer? You know what? Yeah, I would see a murderer for. Would you see, someone who's killed a lot of people? Yeah, no, I would, because that's the oath that I took, and that's the side I'm comfortable being on. But I can understand why others wouldn't.
It's like Bugsy Siegel says, everybody deserves a second chance because you don't know what they can do if they flip, turn a new page. Basically, look at Jaime Lannister, Theon Greyjoy, for instance, in Game of Thrones. Awful people first 2 seasons, then after that, they save the world. Really, in a degree. You never know what someone will become just because they're terrible in this moment. Sure, all the odds are against them. Maybe we all know it won't go well, but who's to say? We don't know the future. So that's well, I agree with your stance. If I were in that position, I would do the same thing because the hope is that people, become better and heal.
And part of it is like I threw my lot in with that kind of code a long time ago, and that code has kept me in the work that I do in good stead, and it's a scaffold I have for everything that I do. And so part of it, I was just worried, like, if I were to choose to withhold care, which, like, just frankly, I'm really good at. like there are people who come from all around the world to see me because I do stuff that's still experimental or it like literally in clinical trials, like literally experimental. I design some of those trials, etc. Like I'm doing novel work in my clinical care and in the research that I do, and I may be either the only one on Earth or one of very few people on Earth from whom you could get that care if you have some rare conditions or rare levels of treatment, refractoriness and depression, for example. And so the decision for me to withhold that would be a big deal. Because it's one thing to say, well, yeah, go see somebody else. And it's another thing if you just happen to be in the very strange position that I'm in where I have the ability to deploy treatments that on average you can't get. And I know it.
And to be honest, to help even one person in her life is a big deal.
It is. It's also you're making a choice at that first moment that sets every step thereafter, right? Like the reflex for me is to say, yes, I'll help. How much choice did I have in that moment to offer help? How much choice would I have to say, with Hitler dying under my hands and I'm the only one who could save him, would I save the guy? Like, I'm a doctor. I probably would just do the thing I'm trained to do. Just save the life.
In that moment, that role.
Yeah.
That's also, I believe, Sartre. What am I saying? I'm going a little Spanish too. Sartre. I'm in Mexico, everyone. Hello. I have a Mexican girlfriend, so I'm very immersed in my Spanish pronunciations this week. But Sartre, he, I believe it's him. The role he talks about, the waiter is just the waiter. He's no longer a human being in that moment. He just thinks, like with Hitler, yeah, I will serve him his soup. Yeah, I got family he's killed, but this is what I'm on the clock for right now. This is or answering those calls. I love you. Hello, how are you? You become that. For me, I'm an editor. I will always edit someone's work, even if I think it's terrible. If they're paying me to give them their honest assessment, I don't think they have a shot in hell to get published. I will still do the right thing per my profession and give them my best and my all and say, okay, it stands the best shot it ever will, And even though I disagree with your decision to go about publishing this, which could be a psychopathic rant, I did not turn you down because I want you to put it out in the world. If you believe that you saw something in it and maybe I didn't, at least now you have the best platform to do so. So I hear you there.
That's a lot of weight we all carry in our own roles.
For sure.
Was this helpful? I'm curious. Was this what you're hoping for?
It's absolutely perfect.
No, this has been, oh my God, this has been amazing. Like, I feel like we really examined all sides of everything. I think we were always going to come to the conclusion of dark side bad. I think we very much fleshed that out.
Dark side necessary. It's one of the sides.
Right? It's right. It's a multi-sided die of complex nuances. I mean, as life should be. I feel like nowadays a big issue that like humanity has as a society is we're really like kind of going back into very black and white. And it's like you forget about the color and the gray area and the nuance. I'm like, can we return to a time of nuance? Many things can be true at the same time, and I think that's kind of what we lose.
How do we welcome the Darksiders in to do something a little bit less dark but still useful that takes advantage of who they happen to be, so they don't destroy us all or even themselves? Like,
Right?
there was a good job as a government hitman for the pre-Empire
Yeah,
Anakin.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I mean, look at Suicide Squad. They were able to do something nice in the end. Um, no, I think that this has been absolutely fantastic, Dr. Mira. I think you came in and you hit the nail on the head just as we knew you would.
So I'll end on, I guess, is it's important to know that even like there's help for stuff that seems hopeless. And so, like, one of the things I don't know is how depressed was poor Anakin as Darth. Like, maybe he was really impaired constantly and suffering, and I mean, it looked like it. He looked unwell, frankly.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and we now have, like, literally now have treatments where I can get depression to remission in, this is true, 1 day.
I have read some of your studies, and
There's
it really
more
is
though.
incredible
There's
what you're
more.
doing.
So essentially, depression can be over, trauma can be over, you can be in remission, and the remission rates we're getting to are on the order of 90% in depression with even a first line intervention. And some of this is not published yet, so I can't talk about it in great detail. But brain stimulation plus neuroplasticity promotion equals relief for people who have never been able to get it before across a range of problems. And it's still not easy to be a person. And so, like, the warning I give people now is, like, this might work. And that might mean you have to question a lot of things about the decisions you made with your life and buckle up because it's going to get weird.
That's
Hope
amazing.
exists.
Always, and that's why we're all in this. Yeah, you got to keep moving forward.
May the force be with us.
Always
Always,
and
always,
always.
and also with you.
And also, oh my God! Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Muir. This has been wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Muir, so much for your time today. That was a pretty incredible conversation. Would you agree, James?
Absolutely, it went in places that I didn't really expect. His expertise and knowledge just took us down a route that we only could have had we had this conversation with him.
Yeah, no, I mean I love talking with professionals. I mean, our nerding out is of supreme importance in my life. But I love talking with professionals. I just love the insight and the experience they bring to the table. It's just major chef's kiss, Dr. Muir. That was absolutely perfect. I guess the question that we need to ask ourselves before we wrap things up is, do we feel we answered the question? Why the dark side?
I'm going to be biased here and say we did collectively. Ultimately, it kind of posited why it's framed against why not the dark side. That's kind of what we expounded upon to get the answer to that initial question. So it's the pros and cons through the lacks and the pluses, in that, if that makes sense in that regard.
Yeah. And I think like I even said that I don't think we were ever going to come to the conclusion that the dark side was a good thing. I think it was more an examination of the why, and I think we got there and got even more. I really enjoyed Dr. Muir's perspective on even like the case of like free will. How like sometimes we don't get to make these choices. Like we don't always get to look at the big picture. We honestly are just kind of going step by step and moment by moment. And sometimes then those are just the decisions we make in the moment.
For sure, he definitely influenced my perception of free will. I'm a little bit more. He moved the meter over for me a little bit. He made a good case in that regard. So I thought that was interesting when he discussed how opportunities and I guess history and just the choices of others can restrict or expand our choices in certain moments. But usually we're within bumper lanes there. With a pretty narrow bandwidth. So I really appreciated his scientific expertise in developing that thought.
No, I agree. I think this was great. I think this was top tier Mind the Force material.
Absolutely, and I hope you all agree too. Please do review. Please, take part in this. You're part of the conversation as well. We're interested in hearing what you have to say. We would like to communicate back with you as well. It keeps the juices going, keeps the juices flowing, helps us really think of new material as well for future podcasts. So please, do contribute to the conversation and like, subscribe, and engage as much as possible, because we really want to keep having future discussions like this.
Please email us. We will email you back personally. We are real people checking our real email. It's true. Shoot us an email at mindtheforcepodcast@gmail.com. Follow on mindtheforce.com. Subscribe to the Mind the Force newsletter. Hit us up on Facebook and Instagram. All of the things. Like James said, the like, subscribe, the share, the 5 stars, the bips, the bops, the boops, all of it. And thank you all for joining us on what has been a personal favorite episode of Mind the Force. Until next time, stay mindful.